connection. Hi, Dr. Richardson. Say hi, Dr. Richardson. So, what I want to do to spark off our lesson today, which, before I even spark it off, what are we about? What have we been doing? Yes, poetry. Why? Analyzing. Analyzing for what? Meaning. Through what? Text. Yes, words. And what about those words? What are the kinds of things we've been looking at? Figurative language. What else? What they mean. Somebody else. Think of other senses.
Metaphor.
Yeah. Yes. Nice. What's something else? Think of the senses, Dawson and Narada. What kinds of things are we looking for in these words? Poetry devices. Nice. Dawson, can you think of a specific category of poetry devices related to the senses? Allusion. Yeah, that's one of the things we're looking for. Peyton. Mood. Yeah, how it feels. What else, Silas? You guys are on a good wavelength. What about sound? Lots about how it sounds, right? Totally. And notice we've been experiencing poetry a few different ways, right? Through music, you've heard it, you've read it, you've spoken it. Is it a different feel for each of those forms? Obvious question. So here's what I want to do to spark things off. Remember the Tlingit dancers yesterday?
Yeah.
From Kwakwan? Anybody not see them? You were all here? Beautiful. I want you to go through, I think it's the last poem in your packet. Speech for the Removal of Grief. Is that indeed the last poem in your packet?
Yeah.
Or is that Raven, Seagull, and Crane? So maybe second to the last?
Yeah.
Perfect. Speech for the Removal of Grief. I want you to go through that. I know our main project is looking for literary devices, and some of you have already done that for this poem. I want you to look through and find as many connections between this poem and the dancing you saw yesterday as you can. But find at least one. Anybody have questions on what we're doing? This is a Tlingit poem. We're connecting it with the Tlingit dancers that we saw yesterday. Ooh, you're so good. Use that one. Nice. Finish up here in next 34 seconds. Okay, what you got? Who wants to share? Peyton.
Where it says his road,
Ah,
kind of like they make the road.
what was that road called? The Healing Road. How marvelous was that? I think it's in May when they're having a ceremony for that. Gosh, I'd like to
And
go.
they're opening the new shop.
Yep. Who else noticed the road?
I also noticed the blade.
Arida, I know you did. Did you highlight it?
Yeah.
With a bang, not a whimper. Michaela?
I have it when there was no sign of fever or hurting, they just started to sing and they had different songs. And they told us the meaning of the songs that they sang yesterday.
Yes.
So even though they didn't sing the song about anything like past, they did sing some things that like that relate to different events. What I'm trying to say is like, I don't know, because I can explain, but
Any-
they told the meaning of it and why they celebrated it.
And how do you see that in the poem?
Well, it just when there's no sign of you returning, he started to sing.
What line are you reading?
On the next page.
See how the lines are numbered? Remember how we can refer to?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if that's the right poem.
Speech for the removal of grief. You, oh yeah, I think you were at the end of the other one.
Oh, okay.
This is speech, but point it out anyway.
Oh, okay. Just that, that could be related because they have, different reasons why they celebrate or their.
Nice. Sure. So those dances and just like these words have significance to, you said events earlier.
I don't know.
Go, you want to roll with it?
Yeah, kind of like when they started singing and the beaver wasn't returning, so they kind of have those songs that they do for like healing processes. If the beaver wasn't coming back, then they could like heal them through the songs.
Cool, huh? Art, this notion that art can be healing. And just like that robe, I think, is such a cool image. Just as a robe, how do they make it? Weaving.
And for
What's-
8 years.
8 years, how cool is that? And what's weaving? Who can describe what weaving
Like,
is?
like this.
Shum.
That's all I can think of that.
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it, sort of.
Like in and out.
Yes, threads are woven in and out of each other, right? To make kind of a pattern like you're talking about?
Yeah, we had to weave for the like snacks and
Yes,
Thanksgiving.
absolutely. And you see how they're sort of weaving together strands of history, events, animals. Are there animals in the dances? In their costumes? In the robes?
Yeah.
In almost everything? Are there animals in here?
Yeah.
You bet. So weaving together animals, things around us, history, people, feelings, healing, hurt, and why do we need healing?
To heal the hurt.
To heal the hurt. What's this poem called?
Speech for the removal of grief.
Right. So grief can be removed or worked through or healed through speeches, songs, dances, robes, and like those robes, we're sort of weaving all of these things together. In a few images, there's kind of a picture of a culture. That's pretty sweet. Anybody notice anything else, any other connections? So the robe, think of that image there in the poem. Do you think, if we looked at our tools for analysis page, do you think we'd have any luck finding something to call that?
Probably.
Probably, because I'm asking you. Smarty pants. Smarty sushi pants. Is it a sound device, do you think? Is it rhythm? Short rhythm, right? Robe. Ain't much rhythm there. Speaker, tone, imagery, figurative language.
Maybe imagery,
How so?
if you like imagine, like you see a road being moved,
Huh,
see that road that's being.
okay, almost in your imagination. You ever think about the connection between those words? Image and imagination?
No.
Well, now you are. Ha! So imagery, descriptions that appeal to one or more of the five senses. Remember I was asking about senses earlier? Emotional response, ways in which images are connected. Is this sounding like we could make something of this with the robe? What kind of robe is it again, Silas? So how could a robe be an image in this poem? Think of the healing robe. Think of this being a speech for the removal of grief. How could a robe be an image of that? Does my question make sense? How? Silas?
Maybe it doesn't actually like heal your wounds. Like, I don't know. Like it doesn't heal real wounds. It might feel like
Emotional.
your internal wounds.
Hmm. The robe isn't like a huge Band-Aid,
Yeah.
right? It's not literally going to help you scab over from a cut.
It might help you recover from like emotional
Hmm.
things.
Maybe. Do you think a robe could do that? Could we just be talking about anything? Could socks do that?
Very special socks.
Maybe.
So
I've had
special.
some pretty special socks in my day.
Cause it's like so special.
Okay, sure. They did spend a long time making it, right?
Like, maybe it doesn't actually heal, like, the emotional, hardships, but just like the thought of it, kind of lightens your spirit.
Interesting.
The thought of that, you guys just make that, and it's called healing robe because it makes you happy.
And how long did it take?
8 years. So they're healed by the thought of healing a robe. Like
Hmm.
how long it took them to what do you call it? Weave it.
Yes.
That would heal them because they know that other people in the tribe love them.
Nice.
Can I just jump in?
Of course.
Do you guys remember, who made the drums? Do you guys remember making the drums a couple years ago?
At Art Fest
Dawson?
or here?
No, it was, was it just Dawson who made? Just Dawson, I think Jesse did and Eliza also, but that was kind of the same thing. It was, they did it also in Klekwan, and then we also did the drums. And what it was bringing the community together, and they're bringing the older, the older generation with the new generation. And there were people, like, this is a perfect example, Rosalie, you guys all know my daughter Rosalie. Well, she actually has a summer job because of that time, because she got to learn, meet Val Lawson, who is now her boss. So it's kind of like, that's kind of like one way, but that's what the whole drum making was supposed to be. And guess what? We're going to be making drums again.
Yeah! I
So
love it.
everybody's gonna have an opportunity. We're gonna be working with they just changed their name. Are they the tribal council?
I think they still are.
Is that their name? Do you guys know? With Sarah Fisher. Exciting. Come on, energy, excitement.
Cool. Yeah, so that process
Yeah.
brings in the whole community. Do we see community in the dancing?
Yeah.
Do we see community in here?
Yeah.
Where?
It says, like,
Family.
just like family.
Ah,
It brings everything.
yeah. Do you have certain, maybe not robes, but certain things like a robe connected to your thoughts of family? Anybody have a blanket from when they were little? Think of a robe. And how did they wear those robes?
Around them, all around them.
Like a blanket,
You think that has anything to do with healing?
Like
What do you think?
like a hug.
Man, like a hug. Imagine you're 5 years old and hurting. What do you want more than anything in the entire universe?
A hug.
So-
Like when you're sad and you're crying. And you,
Yes.
And when someone comes and hugs you, you're like, no hugs.
Because why?
Because it makes you cry even more.
Yes, but is what's best for you to deal with that hurt, to stop crying and just be tough about it?
Yeah, that's what my dad does.
Maybe, maybe. But I think what your mom might say, what my mom might say is cry it out, you know what I mean? Not that it always has to be different with men and women that way, do you know what I mean? Women can be tough, and I'm here to say men can cry their eyes out and still be men. But you see, you're getting a fuller picture of this robe. Is the robe super important in this poem? Does the poet mention it once or more than once?
Well, it mentions it twice. I
Yeah.
think,
It
or
says
At least.
at least twice.
his robe, and then it says my mother's brother,
Hmm.
his robe.
My mother's brother, his robe. You think when that mother's brother passes away that they just throw the robe out?
No, they probably hang it up on the wall.
Yeah, pass down, treasure it, right?
I don't think it was the actual robe that helped you. I don't think the actual healing robes would help her. I think
Hmm.
using it
Hmm.
and trying to get rid of the cultural oppression that they feel.
They were talking about cultural oppression, comparing it to what, Arida? Comparing oppression that Native people have experienced to, anybody else remember? 20th century event, bad Germany, Auschwitz,
World War II.
Holocaust. Did you hear her use the word Holocaust?
I forget it, I think.
Because she said that she was taking the Holocaust class, and that's what they thought, like, the cultural oppression was. That's how they felt the cultural oppression.
And she was talking about how she observed Jewish people working through the trauma of the Holocaust with museums. Remember? Sort of making public or sharing certain images, like piles of shoes or things like that. Is it the shoes that are instrumental? Or like, do the shoes have magical powers? No. But what are they?
Special.
Special. They're images, right? And Dawson, I think you're right. It's not necessarily the robe itself, it's the meaning in the robe. It's the process that they went through, what that robe has come to mean, connected ideas, connotations, if you will, right, to the robe. What are connotations?
Connected ideas.
Yes, connotations, connected ideas. So an image can have connotations just as a word can. Golly, do you think we could even talk about the connotations in robe? Probably, since I'm accent. Any other connections we want to talk about in this one before we move on? From what I remember, we got robe, healing, family, specifically healing of hurt, healing of grief. I want to see that robe, man. I really do. I appreciate the pictures of it, but
Field trip.
field trip, for sure. Okay, let's keep talking about animals, because who doesn't like things about animals? And let's talk about beaver and friends. Did we already do that one?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
How about raven, seagull, and crane? Perfect. Any volunteers?
To read it?
Yes. Very well. Be listeners. It was Crane to whom Raven egged the seagull on. Before his eyes, Crane swallowed it. Maybe it was a trout that he swallowed. I don't know what kind of animal it was. He egged them on. After he went up to Crane, he'd turn around and go from one to the other and say, that guy over there is talking about you. That bum, the one sitting over there. Here he hadn't really been speaking to him at all, but still he keeps on saying that's what he said, because he knows that fish is already dissolving inside him. When I fight, when the hunger hit him,
With the guy like me.
what did I? Michaela, I see why. My packet's all even more messed up than yours is. With a, oh,
After I fight with a guy like me.
thank you. After I fight with a guy like me, first I usually kick him upward under the edge of the rib cage. That's how he coaches him, so that the fish will pop out of his mouth, right? Eventually, he did as he said. He began fighting with Crane. He kicked his belly upward, just as Raven had instructed him. The fish he had swallowed popped out of his mouth. But then Raven flies in on the scene, as if by coincidence. Enough, enough, enough. You're going to kill each other. But here he'd already swallowed it up again. That's the way I know it. Kind of a crazy little poem, yes?
Yeah, it's
Kind of confusing. Yes. Like who's being talked about?
It's like he and him.
Yes.
And everyone.
A lot of those pronouns.
And who is the narrator?
Who is the narrator? Good question. Who is the narrator?
It was Crane who made something.
Then like, when I fight with a guy like me, like, who's
Yeah, but
talking?
then, yeah, and
Right.
at the beginning, like another person is talking because it mentions all three of Raven's little things.
And then I don't know what animal it was.
Interesting. It was Crane to whom Raven egged the seagull on. So Raven is egging on the seagull about Crane. True?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to egg someone on?
Like annoying or
Encourage
what?
them.
Oh,
Maybe a little bit of both. To egg someone on. To encourage them what?
To do something,
To,
like do this,
like,
say what?
like,
How would egging on happen on the playground?
be like, just do it, you
come
know?
on, dude.
I
Just jump, come on.
just jump. I, what?
There you-
I dare you. So encouraging someone to do something, but I like your part about annoying someone. Being dared to do something, does that kind of annoy you too?
Yeah,
You're annoyed until and unless you can fulfill the dare.
yeah, it's always like, okay, well, I'm so down there.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, Izzy,
I
just
thought it was real
stop.
football.
Egging someone on. It's like, hey, I really encourage you to go over and, whatever.
Jump off the bridge.
And jump off the bridge, exactly. It's, hey, that'd be great if you did that. No, it's like, do it,
Like the
do
Christmas,
it.
like the Christmas story where he's like, yeah, your child looks successful.
Totally,
No,
they were,
it won't. He's
they
like,
were egging him on big time in that, right?
And then
Yes.
That is egging someone on. That's what Raven is doing. Do we know anything about Raven?
he's kind of like, well, this is like egging him on, and then he's like, no, don't do that, that's enough. Kind of like he maybe got himself in something that he didn't want to.
Ah.
He didn't mean to.
Interesting. So already, we're thinking about who the speaker is, and we're thinking about certain characters. Does that fit in anywhere in our tools for analysis? Maybe imagery, they're animals. Maybe structure, maybe. Are we giving human characteristics to things not human?
Yeah, they're talking.
They're talking after all, totally.
And they're fighting.
And they're fighting. What about this down here?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You- So, I mean this partly to be encouraging. Some of the questions you're already asking, who is the speaker? Literally, Michaela, your very words are right there on the table. Right? And that's important. You could be talking about, and that's important to notice. You notice the I. I don't know what kind of animal it was. He egged them on.
Maybe it's just like a squirrel sitting in a tree watching
Ah, nice.
But
Glad
then
to be out of
I
it.
said like I, and then it refers to like all of the ratings about anything.
Yep.
Kind of confusing. Like it's on and off.
Alright, was there identity confusion in the dancing?
Which one?
No, not
No,
really,
because
because
like there was
this was girl. One.
So girls and boys have dorsal fins?
Whale.
Wait. That was a whale.
Whale.
They were acting with whales.
Wait, but weren't they girls and boys? You said girls.
Well, like acting
Male-
like whales.
Is there identity confusion in the dancing?
I get it. I don't know how to explain it. Like the girls who are acting like whales
Yes.
had this,
Yes,
and the boys who are acting like whales were this.
yes.
Only because maybe guys, like boys have like a higher, like maybe more sex, so, because they're all the chiefs are usually boys.
Interesting, eh? If
Yeah.
this, yeah, that's in it, go ahead.
Sounds a bigger representation.
Yeah, this is different than this, isn't it?
Well,
I like your
you
word.
can tell they have to be like that.
What did you say, Cyrus?
Well, I understand that, but it's just a way of representing, because then they have to be out to the side and,
It's a simple way of distinguishing.
Yeah.
but that also could be true.
Yes. This is a recurring theme. Hi.
Oh, hi. I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just checking if you have that Sparks book.
Oh, yeah, it's in my,
Do you want me to help?
that'd be great.
Okay.
It's
Sorry,
in
there
the
was no room
cabinets
in
just
my
to the right.
mailbox.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yes, it's a recurring theme, right? But in Tlingit culture, as in most cultures, the reality is more complex. For instance, when a man and a woman marry in Tlingit culture, the man goes to live with the woman in her house. You know who decides who, in your life, you know who would decide who you marry? Your mother, in Tlingit culture.
Oh.
Oh,
Oh.
Right.
That's
So-
probably won't even let them marry
Right, right. Yeah, if your parents had their way, no one. You see my point? That even though there may be this kind of dynamic and a difference there, or a disparity, there's also deep significance to the role of women in Tlingit society, as there is in every society. But keep asking that question, for goodness sakes. What else? What other literary devices? We've been talking about speaker and imagery. What else? You see anything else in the poem?
Kind of a foolish phone.
Kind of a free verse? Is there regular rhyme or meter?
It's kind of like a story.
Yeah.
More like
that.
a story up for you to read.
Sure. Specifically, maybe a folk tale or a myth. Stay tuned for later this spring. What do we call a poem that tells a story?
Narrative.
Nailed it. What do we call a poem that's about love? Those could both be examples,
Ballad.
often a ballad, right? I'm referring to the literary terms page on the website. But you're both right, of course. What else? No, you got him. Sleepers, awake. Enough, enough, enough. What's that?
Repetition.
Dawson, you agree?
it's also, that repetition, like that,
Where? What line?
Where is that bum?
go. Oh, line 11.
Nice. That bum. Interesting example. Is that repetition?
Well, it says it twice,
It does.
but it means to make it look like a stutter, right?
Ah,
Yeah. Kind of
That-
like
that bum.
That, yeah.
A stutter brought on, why? Because of a speech impediment?
Probably the
No.
Anger.
And like, you're like, all the you're trying not to yell. And,
Right. You ever felt that way? So, I could just,
Yeah.
what's the point of repetition? Remember, we're not just about identifying these literary devices, but talking about what they, yes, one of these days, someone besides Peyton's gonna be the first one to answer that. But keep answering, Peyton. So, what's the meaning of repetition?
So show emphasis on the word.
Yeah,
Like, repeating.
absolutely. Enough, enough, enough. Is that repetition?
Yeah.
Does that emphasize the word enough?
Yeah.
Big time. What about that bum? What does that mean?
It means that it's angry.
Yes, means that he's full of emotion to the point where it causes the speaker to stutter.
Yeah.
Is that the same thing as repetition?
No, not really. Something like, something like kind of trying to get something, like you said, emphasize.
Yeah, holy, holy, holy.
Like
That's
that would
repetition.
be repetition because he tried stuttering like that bomb over there, and so that wouldn't really be repetition because not trying to emphasize something.
Okay. Peyton.
Oh, well, I have another. There's alliteration on the next line, on 12. Here he hadn't.
Ooh, I like that. Here he hadn't really been speaking to him at all. Nice. Do you think that could mean anything?
I think it's just a line and call.
Maybe. Sometimes a rose is just a rose. Maybe. Or rather, what you got?
There's a hyperbole in the 31st line.
Yes.
They're gonna kill each other.
Oh, I don't
You're
know.
gonna kill each other?
I wrote that as a metaphor.
Or it
Everybody's
could
doing
not be because
Actually, so we've got a few different readings. By the way, this is the good stuff, right? This happens with leading world experts on poetry, who, by the way, are just reading poetry and thinking and feeling about it the same as you people are. We come together, we've read a poem or a certain line in a poem, and we variously interpret it as literal meaning, as metaphor, as hyperbole. Dawson, help me out. What's hyperbole? What's hyper? Show me hyper. Show me hyper.
Killed like you yesterday.
Oh, I was really.
Full of energy. Hyper means full of energy.
Flipping over and exaggeration.
Exaggeration, right? Exaggerated energy. Hyper. Hyper means above, right? What's that?
I was really happy yesterday.
Super.
Like you were just like watching me.
Watching you bounce off the walls. So hyperbole, exaggeration. Or rather, you're reading this as, you're gonna kill each other. It's like, that's an exaggeration. They're not literally going to end one another's lives, but they're fighting to an inappropriate degree, yes? Or maybe it's metaphor. What does a metaphor do?
Oh,
It compares two things, right? So is this comparing? Maybe not really. This is beginning to sound like one of those multiple choice questions like in your packets about locomotion. What is the best, don't you just hate those? What is the best description of this paragraph? Well, I don't know, I could see a few different options. But is metaphor the best way of describing what's going on in that line? Maybe not. So far, hyperbole seems closest to the truth. Silas?
Hang on. When I fight with a guy like me, would that be a simile?
like a,
Would it?
Comparing what else?
So, is he comparing? What is he comparing?
With a guy like himself.
He's comparing what with a guy like himself?
him.
Him.
He's comparing him to himself?
Yeah, when I fight with a guy like me. Oh wait, that doesn't really make sense.
Well, maybe.
Like when I fight with someone with a similar personality.
When I
Okay.
fight with a guy like me, first I usually kick him up like under the edge of the rib cage, maybe his nose. I'll see if it's the same person. He's like, well, my weak spot is, so.
Maybe.
Maybe that's what he's saying.
Does he use, for one thing, does he use the words like or as?
Yeah.
Yeah, like me.
Okay, a guy like me. Do you still think simile is what's going on?
No.
A raven is like a writing desk. Is that a simile?
Yes.
Yeah.
Dawson,
Compare.
go on.
He's probably a person similar to himself.
Yes. Similar, simile.
Because similar, comparing similar things.
Okay. Maybe he's comparing the fight that he's proposing
So,
between Seagull and Crane, right? He's talking to Seagull, true.
I think.
I know, hard to tell, hard to keep track.
And people in Crane are fighting,
Yes.
and
The right
So-
hander.
It was Crane to whom Raven egged the Seagull on, right? So the Raven is egging the Seagull on to fight Crane. So maybe he's comparing that proposed fight to a fight between him and himself. Do you think it's supposed to be a little confusing?
Yeah.
When I fight a guy like me, that's an interesting line. Reminds me of Oscar Wilde. To love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong romance. This is the Raven version, the Tlingit Raven version. To fight oneself is the beginning of kicking oneself upward under the edge of the rib cage. Interesting.
I mean, I guess well, they're all birds,
Yes?
and a guy like me, like, is it similar to him?
Having a mental battle
Yes.
to hold back a fight.
First, let me ask this. Every time we see the word like or as, should we assume that that's a simile?
We can always check.
We can always check. It ought to be at least a yellow flag. Like, But is it definitely a simile every time you see like or as? No.
I don't think this is similar.
Anybody still think it is? Silas, I think you're right to point it out. But I think we've seen a couple examples, beautiful examples, in fact, I couldn't have scripted it any better, of repeated words that might not necessarily qualify as repetition, and a comparison using like that just might not be a simile. I love it. I love it. Again, this isn't just math. It's not every time you see 2 plus 2, it's going to make 4. Do you know what I mean? It means we have to work a little harder. We have to see what's around us. Let's go back to Arida's example of that, I guess we're going to call it hyperbole. Enough, enough, enough. You're going to kill each other. Could that hyperbole, could that exaggeration serve any purpose? Could it have any meaning? Who's speaking?
The raven.
Yes. So when the raven says, enough, 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 which is what?
Oliver,
Repetition. You're going to kill each other. Repetition followed by hyperbole. Could that, so a stressed followed by an exaggeration.
He's mad.
He's is
Or
Raven
he's
mad?
like- He's like,
the fight went too far.
he's excited.
He's excited. The fight went too far. Arida?
You know,
I kind of think he's faking it
Ah!
because the story's about how the raven wanted the fish that
Yes.
the crane had just swallowed.
Ah!
And it says, as if by coincidence.
Was it really a coincidence?
No.
Was this all according to his evil plan? The same thing we do every day, Pinky. Try to take over the world. Absolutely. What's the raven's whole goal throughout this whole
to
poem?
get that fish.
To get the fish. Does the raven want to share the fish?
No.
No. Does he want to use and manipulate Seagull and Crane so that ultimately he gets the fish?
Yeah.
Yes. So, does his use of repetition and hyperbole followed up like a 1-2 punch, does that advance his cause? What's he trying to do? Who's he trying to?
Trying to get the fish from Crane.
Yes. So is it about Raven feeling riled up? Or rather, you were saying Raven's trying to get what?
Okay.
And so what's he doing with those devices? Who's getting riled up?
He got the seagull riled up.
Yes. Yes. So the Seagull and Crane together are the audience for Raven's performance, right? And for his poetic devices. What, if I were to say, if I were to use repetition and then hyperbole, would that get you, the audience, riled up? Not if it was a Wednesday morning, I'll tell you that much, Mr. Clem. But, you see the point?
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Schmidt, we see the point. I love it. Thoughts? I think we did, like a ton.
It was really productive.
Agreed, thank you. And Raven. Anybody heard any other stories about Raven? Tons. Is, well, sure, but specifically in Native Alaskan,
Yeah. that's
and
very
is,
good.
can you describe Raven as a consistent character? Or is Raven about young love? Is Raven about like a straightforward leader? Like, this is the way it is. I'm gonna lay things out in a very orderly fashion. What's Raven like?
Sneaky clever.
Sneaky, clever, what? Are ravens actually like that?
Yes.
Who's smarter, eagles or ravens? Ravens are pretty smart. Who's stronger? Eagles. Who's trickier?
And more annoying.
And more annoying. Enough, enough, enough! Right? You can almost hear the raven saying that. You're gonna kill each other. What?
Like there's some, like everybody else is like some ridiculous ones, and but it's kind of cool how they're also like really spiritual, like the
Mm.
like the Native Americans,
Mm.
it was the Raven was traveling, and
Yes.
my dad saw Raven like at work one time, and so it was pretty cool on the road, and he didn't hit it because he believed in that too. So
Cool.
that's pretty neat.
It's, remember in poetry, every word matters. In fact, every bit of punctuation matters. You see how this is mirroring a worldview. Do animals matter in this worldview?
Yeah.
Does
They're
ice?
like everything.
Everything. Does ice matter? What an image, right? The beaver singing, no wait, not the beaver, but the groundhog singing the ice into being. Whoa. So, a worldview and a poetic style and a dance and a weaving and a healing process can all kind of get, what was it, Peyton?
We've,
Woven. So true. Good job, people. I gotta say, is it making more sense, this literary analysis, literary terms
Yeah,
stuff?
definitely.
I can see you're getting better. Take heart, keep heart. You're seeing more things. This is not, by any stretch, easy poetry to analyze. I didn't take it out of the 7th grade literature book. This is tough stuff. This is the kind of thing you'd be reading in high school and college. But I'm really impressed with what you've been able to do with it. Mind if I collect your packets, please? No, Mr. Schmidt, we want to hang on to them forever. They're our healing robe. Too bad. Thank you. Thank you. Good luck with Wednesday. Gather you rosebuds.